Hello, everybody, and welcome to this talk from the Anglo-Peruvian Society by Father Michael Garnett, resident in Cajamarca, Peru, as he will tell us. My name is Christopher Garnett, and as some of you know, I'm a member of the APS committee. We tried to do this talk live earlier this week, and now you're watching a recording, either streaming it or having downloaded it from our website, and you're all very welcome. I'm glad you're here. It's a distinct pleasure for me to introduce Michael for this talk, as he is my first cousin once removed. I'm afraid I'm rather pedantic about this. Michael is the son of my great uncle, although in the parlance of Latin America, of course, Father Michael Garnett, for many years now Miguel, is of course mi tío, or my uncle for non-Spanish speakers out there. My own father was Michael's verdadero primo hermano, his true cousin in the conventional sense, his first cousin. And my father had sometimes spoken of a priest in the family who lives in Peru. That seemed very exotic to me as a child. When my father died in 1991, I wrote to Michael to tell him the sad news. And 6 months or so after that, I went to Peru to visit him. My first trip to the country, and indeed my first trip to Latin America full stop. 30 years on, Latin America, and Peru in particular, are so embedded in my life, both my family and my work, that it seems odd it might ever have not been so. Meeting Padre Miguel in Cajamarca truly set the course of my life ever since. I arrived by bus from the coast. In those pre-Fukimori days, the road was arduous and long, and I took a taxi to the main square. I found the biggest church and went in and asked if anyone knew El Sacerdote Inglés, the English priest. Such was my Spanish in those days. Of course, everyone there did know Michael. He's a legendary figure in his adopted home city, and a guy ran off to find him, and I sat in the square to wait. Michael went to live in Peru under orders from the then Cardinal of Westminster, a story on which he'll give us a little more color in a few moments, back in 1967, only a couple of years after his studies in Rome and his ordination. And a few years later, he became a Peruvian citizen. His life as the living embodiment of Anglo-Peruanismo has been spent mainly in the Northern Andes, where of course he is now. He's a prolific poet, playwright and novelist. His work is informed by the human life of the people and the country around him. He's a painter too, and a polemicist for the societal and environmental good of his region and of his community. And he's a black belt in karate. This is an anecdote about him I particularly enjoy. The last time I visited Michael in Cajamarca, which was in 2013, although we've met since in England, and I saw him there in his book-filled study with his own tiny chapel next door and its shrine to Cardinal Newman, St. John Henry Newman, I should say. He was still training then in self-defense the local police cadets. I won't tell you how old he is, but you can find that in his biography, and you can calculate that back in 2013, he was still quite a senior cura karateka, the karate priest. As I say, his extended biography and his bibliography, so that you can see all of his work, are both hosted on the Anglo-Peruvian Society's website. So do please have a look at that, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the talk. Michael, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Carol, too, and all the members of the Anglo-Peruvian Society who are collaborating to record this talk, and also to my two technicals who are living here with me. Percy, who's a school teacher, he lives in the same house, and Luis, who's a godson of mine, he lives just on the other side of the patio between the two houses here in this condominium. Well, I'm talking to you from my home in this historic city of Cajamarca, at some 2,800 meters above sea level in the northern Andes of Peru. Next. It's an historic city because it was here on November the 16th, 1532, that the Spanish conquistadores captured the Inca Atahualpa and so effectively brought the Inca Empire to an end. No, none. To prepare the talk, I have interrupted my work, which I was engaged in for the presentation of 3 novels in a book fair, which are going to take place here in Cajamarca at the end of this month. One novel is that of the winner of a competition held here last year. The second is of an author who enjoys national reputation here in Peru. And the third is of a guy who lives in Oregon, the United States, and he enjoys an international public in Spanish letters. So how come I, as an immigrant, came here in 1967 without a word of Spanish, have now been invited to give these presentations? And as I say to myself, well, I'm a minnow trying to present Wales. Well, the next. The whole thing starts for me back in 1967 in the city of Huaraz. Huaraz is a city similar to Cajamarca, some 200 kilometers to the south. And I was there with a couple of English friends, priest friends. We were all volunteers to work here. And it was Christmas. We were staying with the Benedictines from North America who had a priory there. And we were spending Christmas with them. And just after the midnight mass, the bishop arrived next. And he spoke to each of us, very gentle figure. When it came to my turn, he said, Father, what are you doing? And I said, studying Spanish, Monsignor. Next. And then he said, well, he took my hands and looked me straight in the eyes and said, I wish you every happiness and success in the language of Miguel de Cervantes. Next. Well, this at the time didn't really strike me very deeply, though at the back of my mind, there had always been a desire when I was studying in England to be able to write something notable. And one of the things which I enjoyed so much was The Hound of Heaven by Francis Thompson. However, next, that was firmly squashed by my English master, who informed me, and I think he was right, that I was a complete clown where writing English was concerned. And so the idea of writing just didn't really to take off at all whilst I was in England. Well, as I say, we were 3 priests volunteers next. And now the volunteering in my case was done by Cardinal Heenan. It wasn't my idea to come to Peru. I was working, well, he sent me to work with the Irish Society, Missionary Society of St. Columba. Well, it had started at a lunch in Archbishop's house in Westminster. And the Cardinal had called in myself and other priests who were we were ordained together. We'd been ordained for just about 2 years. And he wanted to know how we were getting on. So we had this sort of buffet lunch, and he spoke to each one of us one by one. When it came to my turn, he said, well, now, Michael, have I got your ideas straight? Next. And he was obviously referring to something which I had written. Now, what had happened was that an auxiliary bishop had visited the parish where I was working, and we chatted, and I explained that I was interested in working with down and outs and dropouts in society. And that was, in my case, was inspired by my own interest in what had happened to Charles de Foucault. Charles de Foucault had been a 19th century aristocrat in France. He became a cavalry officer, was a drunkard, a womanizer, so they threw him out of the army. And then he became a hermit, eventually lived in the Algerian desert. And his whole philosophy wasn't to convert people, just to accompany them and be with them. And so that was what I was trying to do. Next. Now, this comes up in Pope Francis' recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, when he talks about not judging, but just accompanying. And Charles de Foucault is the last person he mentions in that encyclical. Next. Well, whilst working in the parish, I'd become used to also visiting dropouts, drug addicts, alcoholics, sitting with them on what the bomb site which still existed in London at that time. And this was sort of a side, but it was a joke between me and my fellow curate, George Dangerfield, who died a couple of years ago. George and I were totally different. George was the acme of clerical elegance, and I was a shambolic creature who tended to turn up for breakfast unshaven in dirty jeans because when sitting on a bomb site during the night. Me, no. Whilst the bishop and I talked about my loafing around with alcoholics, no. I explained that the parish structure was completely hopeless of trying to deal with these kind of people. I couldn't bring them into the parish, and I wanted to set up some kind of centre where I could work from, and so I sketched out a project. Next. Now, this is obviously what the Cardinal referred to when I was at this buffet lunch, and when he went, he said to me, "Have I got your ideas straight?" Well, my reply was, because he gave a pretty good resuming of what I had said, and I said, "Yes, Monsignor, or Eminence, that is more or less what I was thinking." And he said, "Well, that's fine. Now I've decided what I want you to do." And I was all eager to hear the reply, and he said, "I want you to go to South America." Bloody hell, went through my mind. Not the most elegant reply, but then the Cardinal said to me, "Perhaps you need a couple of days to think about it." And so I went off, and my initial reaction was, "Well, this is ridiculous. I don't know any Spanish. I don't know anything about South America, except once upon a time there was an Inca Empire." But then I suddenly realized this is carpe diem, seize time by the forelock. And so my reply was, as the Virgin Mary replied to Gabriel, "Fiat, let it be done according to your will." Next. Well, after I finished in the language school, I went down to Lima, and down in Lima, I was appointed by the Colombian Superior to a barrio called San Martin de Porres, to the north of the city. There wasn't a shanty town officially in those days. It wasn't much better. Next. Shortly after my appointment, I got permission to go and live with the family. I decided that this was the best way to really incorporate myself in Peruvian society. And with the family, of course, I was able to learn what I hadn't learned in the language school, things like nursery rhymes and fairy stories. And I had to speak Spanish all day and all night. There was no escape. Well, this, I think, is summed up what I was trying to do next in a book which I translated a couple of years ago. It's called in English A Foot on Either Side, and that was my translation of Un Pie Cada Lado, written by a lady called Maria Alba. She is from Moyabamba, on the jungle of Peru, and she was educated here in Peru up to university level, and then because there was no work, she emigrated to Barcelona. She eventually marries a Swede, and I think she lives in Switzerland now. But her whole theory was that you have to get into the culture in which you have immigrated. You can't leave your own culture behind and forget about it, but you must get into the other culture. As I would say, the leopard can't change his spots. There's no reason why he shouldn't acquire some new ones. Next. Along with the family and attending to day-to-day affairs in the parish, I came to hang out with youths on the street corners. But needless to say, my vocabulary increased quite considerably, but I won't go into the details of that. And then I began to write, because they could play instruments and things, so we began to write songs. And then from songs, we graduated to sketches, and from that, even to a passion play. And my own theory about all this was that God had obviously got things wrong. Where I was concerned, he had me born in England. I should have been born in a Spanish-speaking society. So, like Habakkuk, the prophet, I was whisked across the Atlantic and came here to live in Peru. Well, next. This, I think, is summed up by a doctor, philosopher in Madrid, Mario Alonso Puig. He was born in 1955 and sustains in a lecture that many of us have things, talents and capacities within us which we don't really understand or we don't realize. And then something happens that triggers the whole thing. And he takes the example of the chrysalis, the worm who can crawl along the ground, he can climb a tree, he can go along the branch, but he can't fly from one branch to another. Then suddenly it changes and it becomes a butterfly. And it can fly from branch to branch, from tree to tree, and wherever. And I think this is more or less what happened in my case. Well, I became, I reckon, a cabbage white, not a monarch or a painted lady. Next, me. So, writing soon made me realize the great importance of language for all of us. And I'm much in favor of trying to conserve languages and protect languages, especially in those which are in danger of extinction. And I just want to, here in Peru, we have 3 official languages: Spanish, Quechua, Aymara. And then about 40 languages are spoken in the jungle. And I just want to relate a small incident which happened a few years ago to underline the importance of language as real communication. I was down in the south in a prelature called Ayaviri, and I'd been sent there to give a talk to the priests about pensions and can't think of the word in English. Anyway, I was to talk to the priests, and there was a fiesta in Ayaviri, and they said to me, "Would you please go and say the mass?" Because we're busy on a series of meetings here. So off I went to say the mass in the cathedral. I was very impressed by all the people who had shown up there with beautiful cloaks and embroidered. And I started the mass in Spanish, which was the normal thing. But it suddenly flashed across my mind that I could sing the Kyrie, the Lord have mercy, in Quechua. So I intoned this in Quechua, and the whole atmosphere just changed. And all of a sudden, we were on a different level. It was a deep communication. Next. I would say that a person who sums this up is Cardinal Newman with what he put on his coat of arms when he was made a cardinal: cor ad cor loquitur, which means heart speaks to heart. And this, I think, is the most important thing. It's far more important than the mind. It's the heart. Next. And this, of course, is really what Ezekiel says in his prophecy: I would take away the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Now, all this can be summed up in a sense by what Shakespeare says in The Tempest. And he says, "Be not afraid, the isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs, that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices." In my case, listening to the landscape and everything around me, the Pachamama, the Mother Earth, the apples, the mountains, have resulted in my creating a series of paintings in a rather peculiar cubist style, and which I call an apple symphony, a symphony of the mountains. Next. I stayed in Lima for 5 years and then got Cardinal Hina's permission to ask Bishop Dammit of Cajamarca to take me on, along with another English priest, John Medcalf. We teamed up with a German priest, Rudi Eichenlau, and we were soon plunged into the dynamic atmosphere encouraged by Bishop Dammit, or Don Pepe as we called him. Much of his thought was influenced by liberation theology and the testimony of Charles de Foucault, I've already mentioned. With Don Pepe, I was to enjoy a very warm relationship until he died. Next. John, who didn't stay for all that long in Peru, managed to found Bibliotecas Rurales. And now, one of the things about trying to teach the illiterate to read and learn and to write is that you've got to be able to offer them something that they want to read and it's available to them. Very often this isn't the case. Now, I was talking one day to a lady, we'd met someone out in the middle of the country, and she said to me, "Have you got one of those papers?" And I thought, which paper? And she referred to the parish bulletin. The parish bulletin consisted of just one sheet of paper, doubled over, and it had all kinds of information about local news, something from the gospel of that week, but also prices on the market and how much you should pay and how to use medical, the herbs for medicines and things like that. It was what they wanted to learn. And she said, "I can't read, but my son can read, and he reads to us when he obtained this every Sunday." And so there it was. What they wanted to learn, it was cheap and it was available. Next. Now, one of the words I'm using in this is campesino, campesina. It vaguely means country folk, but it's easier for me to talk of campesinos than I'm entirely used to. Now, bibliotecas rurales or rural libraries have been set up in Cajamarca by John all that time ago, and they're still going strong. And the money that is collected to help them, they don't spend on organization, they don't spend it on the office, like so many of the non-governmental organizations who spend all their money, as I can see, on secretaries and transport. Bibliotecas Rurales spend it on books. And the books are taken by the local people in charge of each little library. And the system is 20 books which you can put into a saddlebag on alforja. And they take it out on foot to wherever they live. And after a month or so, 2 months, they make a note of everything that is read. And they take the books back and ask for 20 more. And so this way the books keep circulating. Now, next. One of the things about Bibliotecas Rurales is not only that are they reading books, but they're publishing books. Now, my last book, which is here on the screen, Tamborín and the Architect, is modeled on one of the guys who really worked for years in Bibliotecas Rurales, an extraordinary character. He lives way out in the middle of nowhere, had just about 3 years schooling, but he has read more books than all the professors of language and literature in Cajamarca put together. And I remember interviewing him once on television, and it was Ken Follett's novel, The Pillars of the Earth. Well, if any of you know that, it's a huge book. And to talk to Pascual about books and literature, and he could talk about the native literature and also international literature. Next. At the same time that John was founding Bibliotecas Rurales and all that, they came up on the possibility for people in the country to write, because the military government, which had taken over in 1968, had formed in Lima what they call telecentrals, the combination of several television channels. And the idea was to try to produce Peruvian plays and things to put on television, not to be importing everything. And friends of mine who had in Lima, because of the passion play which we wrote, I'd got in contact with people from the dramatic school. They encouraged me to write. And so I wrote the play, and this was known as The Lord of the Fall. Next. Well, the play was duly produced on television, and based on the idea of Christ who's falling during the Passion, but it was all to do with the problem of people who have to leave the mountains, the Sierra, and go to work on the coastal cities. Well, next. I was happy, of course, that I got one of the prizes and my play was published on television. Well, what really pleased me was what happened one day. I'm walking along a path, and a guy called me from his house, and he said, "Father, I want to talk to you." My reaction wasn't terribly pious, but I walked up and we sat down, we had a drink, and he said, "Father, a couple of months ago I was in Lima, and I saw your play on television. Well, it was great, because that is the way things are. And that, for me, was terribly important. I had discovered I could get into the way things are for the ordinary people with whom I was working." Next. So, to some extent, this play has underlined what would become for me an important feature in writing. My characters, by and large, with the exception of 2 novels I wrote about history, the War of the Pacific in Peru, that took place in 1879 to 1883. But most of my characters are for people below, the ordinary people down at the bottom of the social pyramid, not at the top. Next is me. No slide. Well, along with Rudy and the Spanish guy who joined us, Manolo Sevillano came to live with us, and he and his family. And Rudy and I decided we've got to write something for our people, to teach the faith, because the ordinary catechism, which is published, there are catechisms, but they're very intellectual, they're very cerebral, and for the way our people think. So I like to illustrate the difference with a rather delightful little story of something which apparently occurred one fine day here in Cajamarca. Next. It's all about what had happened was that some engineers, agriculture engineers, went out to give some information in a village, and they would talk to the people, and then came the evening, they got a meal, and a woman saw them putting up a tent, and she said, "You better not sleep there, come into the house, it's going to rain." And they looked at the sky, and it was a beautiful Andean sky with the stars, and not a sign of a cloud. And well, so they didn't take any notice of the woman, they went to their tent. At about 2 in the morning, the heavens opened, and down came the rain. And they had to dash into the house. And then they said to her, "Well, how do you know it was going to rain?" And she said, "Oh, the donkey, when he rolls in the grass, we always know it's going to rain." "Bloody hell," they said, "donkeys know more than we do." Well, that's the concrete way of thinking. Next. Well, it was to take Rudy, Manolo, and I 2 years to write the book to teach the faith. It's called Vamos Caminando. This is a rather battered copy because it's the first edition. Vamos Caminando goes through the life of people, of a family in a country district, and the faith is taught a bit, explaining different moments of our lives. And it had a little success here. It was translated then into several languages. And one of the most extraordinary things for me was an English translation. I was in London some years after this was published. I'd gone to some event, and a guy said to me, "There's a person here who wants to talk to you." And this fellow came up and he said, "Look, I'm a Methodist missionary, and I work in Africa." He said, "The book we use to teach the faith to people is Vamos Caminando. Let's walk," the book that you wrote for the Andean country folk. So, well, that for me was great. Now, next, the book is lavishly illustrated with photos from Rudy's brother Alois, who still lives here in Cajamarca, and a lady called Lucy Johanovich. Lucy has become a very famous painter. She lives in Florence. But we insisted that Lucy would come and join us for a few weeks and sketch and make her drawings for the book, because we wanted someone to see how the campesinos in Cajamarca really look, and not how middle-class people in Lima think they look. Because I've seen government publications, and it's a kind of stereotype person from the Andes who've got nothing to do with the people who live in Cajamarca. Well, next. Having finished Vamos Caminando, I was appointed by the bishop to go and work in this province, which you can see, Cajamarca, right down the south of the diocese of Cajamarca. I wasn't going to have time to do any writing there. I was the only priest in a large parish about the size of an English county, but stretched out over the Andes, and it would take 3 or 4 days to get from one side to the other walking. And I had about 50 or 60 chapels. I can't remember how many. And my policy was to walk around, because that's what you're with the people when you're walking. And what did happen was I got to know people who were influenced me later on. Next. One of the families I got to know was that Ciro Alegria. Now here you see a series of novels. Ciro Alegria wrote 3 famous novels. Los Perros Hambrientos, The Hungry Dogs, La Serpiente de Oro, the Golden Serpent, and El Mundo es Ancho y Ajeno, which is the world is wide and foreign. Now, what happened was that I found myself walking and living in this enormous parish, which was limited by this river Marañón. Next. The Marañón is one of the tributaries of the Amazon, and these books which I mentioned, were all written about that area. And Ciro Alegria wrote about campesinos. And so I came to sort of share with his characters, Simon Robles, Rosendo Macchi, from the books. And as I walked around sharing the life, I found this very, very informative for me. I filled my mind with ideas and scenes and all the rest of it, so that when I was eventually going to write, I had a great store of chauvinist information. Now, next, this is all summed up by something written by this guy you can see, Thomas Merton, an extraordinary Trappist monk from the States. He died over 50 years ago, but he wrote an autobiography called The 7-Story Mountain. In English, it was called Elected Silence. And it was published in 1948. And he speaks of the French country folk amongst whom he spent much of his childhood. I remember their kindness and goodness to me, and their peacefulness and their utter simplicity. They inspired real reverence, and I think in a way they were certainly saints. They were saints in that most effective and telling way, sanctified by leading ordinary lives in a completely supernatural manner, sanctified by obscurity, by usual skills, by common tasks, by routine, from the grace, inspired by the grace within, and from the habitual union of their souls with God, in deep faith and charity. Their farm, their family, and their church were all that occupied these good souls, and their lives were full. Next. This describes perfectly the families of Alejo, Nico, Pancho, and all the other ones who I've come to know, and in whose houses I've spent the evening enjoying conversing with them, savouring jokes and anecdotes. We would share a bottle of the local hooch, whilst the ladies were cooking at the fire, and the guinea pigs, of course, were running around over the earthen floor of the kitchen. Next. Well, in 1982, the bishop took me away from Cajabamba, and I was appointed to the seminary in Cajamarca. Now, this was the time of the Shining Path emergency, or Sendero Luminoso. And I was kept very busy because I was the president of the Human Rights Committee in Cajamarca, but also there were vacation periods from the seminary. And so this was an opportunity to start writing. Next. I was soon working on my first novel, Rondo. Rondo is a surname in the area to the south of Cajabamba, where I'd been a parish priest, and a campesino who worked with one of the families in Cajabamba had that name. Whenever I visited the house, he would greet me with a broad smile, though he said not a word. Next. he made me think of a passage of one of the great novels of another Peruvian author, Jose Maria Arguedas, the novelist Todas las Sangres, or Every Strain of Blood, referring to the multi-ethnic nature of Peru. Someone speaks of a stranger who arrived, very bedraggled, but in his eye there was God. What God? What do you know? How do you know? God is hope. God is joy. God gives us strength. I use this apparently simple campesino as a model for the main figure of the novel, the kind of incarnation of campesino wisdom, very close to the Pachamama, Mother Earth, very close to the apples, the mountains that protect us. Me. The idea of the novel flashed into my mind one day when, to be quite honest, I think I'd gone to the lavatory. There, the inspiration came across, and I went to my desk and I sat down and I began to write about Rondo. A Rondo is he's in a field. He got a bit pissed like last night, drinking chicha, maize beer. And he sees the landscape and it's dancing in front of him. And here I felt was the kind of incarnation of the campesino wisdom, this closeness to the earth. And the earth is alive. So this, I think, is one of the things which is really important for me. And it also enabled me to really bring to life in my own books what I shared in the campesino kitchens at night. And after a day's hard work, and you go into the kitchen, usually very, very simple. The pots of food bubbling over the open fire, guinea pigs perhaps sizzling in the frying pan, and other guinea pigs running around on the floor. Well, this was, as far as I was concerned, it's a wonderful way of life. And one of Ciro Alegria's books is that life is good. Well, next, I also wanted, and not only to do that, but I wanted to redeem to some extent the figure of the country priest in the Andes. Now, this is a bit of a caricature of the 19th century priest, but he comes out incredibly badly in the novels of that time. Clorinda Mata di Turna wrote Ave sin nido, birds without a nest. And then there was a famous discourse from the 19th century thinker, Manuel González Prada, in which he said the priest was one of the oppressors of the Andean India. Next. Well, I wanted to offer something different. Furthermore, I wanted to show that the Andes also is a center of life. There was the feeling, and still is to some extent, that if you want to get on in life in Peru, you've got to go down to the coast to one of the big cities, Lima or Chiclayo or Trujillo. And I wanted to illustrate you can work in reverse. And I chose the figure of a young painter who's fallen out with his family in Lima, and in the mountains is finding his real life and is enjoying becoming a real creator. Next. Now, as I started writing, I think I read this book by Mario Vargas Llosa, who writes letters to a novelist. And he says in that book, you've got to sit down and plan your novel. Next is me. Well, I can't plan a novel. I'm hopeless. I wanted to be an architect. And I could draw the plans of a house, but I can't plan a novel. I just start with something that happens. And my novels grow rather like Topsy in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. So things just sort of go and grow by themselves. And I like to have absolute silence in which to work. And the novel seems to write itself. Now, this may sound strange. You probably think, but I've read that this happens in some cases, and certainly in my case. And I like silence, complete silence, and not to be interrupted by anybody. Because if anyone comes and interrupts me, just a minute, Father. Whether they cut the film and the whole thing, it's hopeless. So I was able to go to a number of parishes out in the country, run not by priests, but by sisters. And we've had an enormously fruitful relationship. And in one parish, they gave me a room, and there I could work. And if the bell rang, well, it wasn't for me. And if the telephone rang, it wasn't for me. And I could get on with writing. And that's the way all my novels pretty well have turned out. Next. Now, obviously, for someone writing in Peru, but has an English education, well, the whole question of the imagination. Well, I was fortunate. My mother read to me Beatrix Potter Neville's. I graduated to Alice in Wonderland. And this, The Wind in the Willows, is still one of my favorite novels. I've got a recording of it. And yeah, the whole idea of the imagination taking over, the novels of adventure stories for adolescents, and of course Harry Potter is a kind of successor to all that, particularly because young people are more intelligent than adults in those novels. As I say, the imagination, next. And this is emphasized by this lady, Denise Lervatov. She was an Anglo-American poet, born in 1923, she died in 1997. But she said, the imagination is one of the most important faculties that we possess. And I entirely agree. Next. And to go back to Mario Vargas Llosa, here he is giving his acceptance speech when he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2010. And he speaks of overcoming the barriers of time and space, which enabled him to journey with Captain Nemo for 20,000 leagues under the sea, to fight alongside D'Artagnan, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis against intrigues and threats to the Queen conjured up by the wily Richelieu, or drag himself through the sewers of Paris, having become Jules Valjean, carrying the inert body of Marius. Next. With regards to each novel, something usually happens which sparks the thing off. Now, I wrote one novel called Cañadas Oscuras, The Valley of the Shadow of Death, and it's about that dreadful war between Peru and Chile as it influenced Cajamarca. Now, what happened was that one fine day, I was in the street and it pouring with rain, and I rushed into a doorway, and a young guy came up, and we knew each other. He'd written a thesis on my novel Rondo, and we began to talk. And then it suddenly flashed across my mind that we were standing at the doorway of the house of General Miguel Iglesias, and just up the street was the house of Jose Mercedes Puga. Now, Iglesias and Puga were
take my seat, and then I'll explain to you what my problem is. It's going on live right now. Yeah, but as far as I'm aware, I hear or see us.
Iglesias was said we've got to stop this war. We must make peace, however humiliating.
I've got the rotating rainbow. They don't need to hear me.
Mario,
this person
of Cáceres, Avelino Cáceres, said we must go on fighting. I suddenly realized that this street must have seen a tremendous conflict between people on the two sides. And it really was in Cajamarca a civil war. And I thought, I live on this street. So I dashed up to my room and began to write, and a novel just poured out. Next. And the novel starts with a guy arriving in Cajamarca. He's escaped from Lima, and next. And he's coming past this extraordinary scene known as the Frailones, way above the city of Cajamarca. And as he rides down into the city, and the whole sequence of the war is described through him, and in a sense, this novel just flowed out of me, and it just went. I think I wrote it in about 3 weeks. Next. Now, what happened here in Cajamarca was that as the Chileans were advancing, 3 schoolboys stood up in the patio of their college and said the country has been invaded, our homeland, our fatherland is being dishonored. The flag is being trodden on. We've got to do something about this. And what happened was they created here in Cajamarca a small citizen army. There were shopkeepers and schoolboys and teachers and a few professional people here, and they went out to fight the Chileans. And in the Battle of San Pablo, which is halfway down to the coast from Cajamarca, the Peruvians won. The 3 boys were killed right at the beginning of the battle. I think in the Chilean version of this war, that San Pablo is just a skirmish and they don't pay much attention to it. But here in Cajamarca, it is important, and there's a ceremonial arch and everything. And so that was great. Now, next, the way I wrote these historical novels, in a certain sense, I copied what Dennis Wheatley does in his Roger Brooke novels, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. Roger Brooke, of course, is a fictional character, but all the surrounds are real, and that's more or less what I did. My main characters are fiction, but they're surrounded by real characters and real incidents. Next. Now, I mentioned that the Shining Path emergency was taking place whilst I was working in the seminary, and I decided I got to write about this. In other places in the world, catastrophes, wars have produced also great literature. So I thought I'd do something about this, and I wrote this novel, Cajaquil. Now, Cajaquil was a pre-Inca god here in Cajamarca, and he's always pictured with lightning shafts in his bolts in his hand, and so he's the god of the storm. And I thought he was a very good symbol of what was happening in the country. And I was working there in human rights, and I was involved in cases. So Cajaquil's sort of came up, but it's been translated into English, and it's called Tempest in the Andes, because Cajaquil wouldn't mean much to anybody if they saw that on the cover. Next. Now, the novel describes quite a lot of the confusion and the muddle that we were living through. I mean, the extraordinary. I was down in Cajabamba during this period, and Cajabamba suffered a lot, and I went to stay there to give the priests there a bit of time off. And there were a beautiful summer's day, blue sky, birds singing, flowers, and all the rest of it. And then you walk along a path and there's a dead body with something written over there saying this is the way the traitors die, and this kind of thing. So I felt I had to write something about this. And so I tried to write this novel, Cajaquil, which has been described by a friend of mine as perhaps one of the best novels about the Shining Path emergency. Next. Now, I also wanted in this. Next. Yeah. I wanted to counter this novel, which you see, in Octubre no hay milagros. Now, this was written, it was published just before I came to Peru in 1966, and it caused absolute outrage. And why? Well, Octubre for us is a kind of Lent, and this is, and the great devotion is to our Lord of the Miracles, El Señor de los Milagros. Now, this novel has the procession at the center, but all the characters around, the most disagreeable collection of characters, and they're all doing thoroughly unpleasant things. There certainly aren't any miracles. Well, I wanted to do something a bit different next. And here you see actually how in Lima this procession it takes place. There'll be 1 million people taking part in this. And the whole of the center of Lima gets completely gummed up with this extraordinary devotion to a painting that was originally done by an Angolan peasant or slave in the 17th century in Lima. Next. Well, what I wanted to do was try and create something around processions, yes, but because during Holy Week we have procession every single day or every single night, but we'll try and create something positive, but at the same time showing all the confusion. The Passion of Christ was very confusing. There were the Romans, there were the high priests, there were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, there were the ordinary people, there were the apostles, and a whole crowd of people, all with different takes, if it is here, on what was going on. And this is the way I've tried to write that novel. Yes. Another novel I wrote, a short novel, on the Shining Path Emergency, is called Polvareda, Dust. Now this it hasn't got a religious dimension. It's just about a guy who is a young guy in a small town. The terrorists arrive, they burn the municipality, they burn all the archives, and they want to kill the mayor. They want to shoot him there in the square, which this kind of thing happens frequently. But this guy helps the mayor to escape. Then when the mayor's got away, he denounces this guy for being a terrorist. Well, this kind of thing was just typical of what was going on. It was absolutely chaotic. Next. Now, in contrast to all this, was another novel I wrote, and it's called Don Jasho. Don Jasho, Jasho is a diminutive of Jacinto. Don Jasho is a rather special character, and the novel takes place in an imaginative town based on of Tucumán, just to the north of Chiclayo on the coast. And in the outskirts of Tucumán, there are grandes huacas. Huacas are sacred mountains, really, or sacred tombs like pyramids. And I was sitting up there one day with a friend of mine, and we looked out over the landscape and watched the sun sinking into the Pacific. And I said, I've got to write about this. And well, anyway, Jasho is a boozer, womanizer. He's got I don't know how many kids, and he's not a very laudable character, but he's got his own philosophy. He can't stand anyone who treats badly the poor or the weak. And so Jasho is someone who helps. He's someone, and then he's considered a martyr by the local people because he rushes into the market when it catches fire, and he saves a child, and then he goes back and he goes to bring out another one and dies in the fire. So as far as the local people are concerned, Jasho is a saint. Next. Well, the novel went along fine for a while, and then it stuck. And I shoved it in an archive. But I had some time later to present a book by this archaeologist, Alfredo Narvaez. Alfredo Narvaez wrote a book about the gods and the legends of that area of Peru. It's called Lambayeque, is the area. And I said at the end of the talk, well, I hope that someone will come and kiss my sleeping beauty in the file, one of these old gods or one of these old legends, and it'll wake up. And what happened was, extraordinarily, a month later, I handed in the text to a friend of mine in Lima, and I have no memory of how I wrote or what I wrote, of the actual writing. Of course, I can read the book now and I know what I wrote. Well, what did happen next? The local people turned Jasho into a saint, and they built a shrine to him. And this, of course, upsets the local priest. And then, just to complicate matters a bit further, apart from this cult springing up, they discover under the tomb next the remains of some not pre-Inca lord. Now, this is a vision of the Lord of Sipan. His tomb was found in 1988, and he's like a sort of Peruvian Tutankhamun, because they found a sort of tremendous wealth in the tomb. Now, my idea was just under Don Jasho's tomb was the tomb of some ancient religious or civil leader of a previous culture. And then below that, once again, they found the finest clay, and this creates the whole problem with mining, which was one of the problems which I can talk about here in Cajamarca. So the novel is conflicted with three levels: the popular saint, the remains of the ancient leader, and the modern mine. Next. Well, that started, as I say, on top of a thought about that on top of a pyramid. This novel, Ojo de Pájaro, Bird's Eye View, has a completely different start. I had been asked by a friend to write an article about being a writer in the Andes, which I wrote the article, and the article was published in the magazine he was running. And then he said, well, that was fine, but I'd like the second part. And I sort of said, yeah, what? I thought I'd written an article, so there's no second part. He said, look, Andean writing looks back to the past. It's nostalgic. People in Lima aren't interested in that. The youngsters in Lima who want to write, they want to look forward. So we need the second part. Next. So one fine day, I found myself chatting with a group of writers here, youngsters, and I told them about this, and they said, we're not interested in the past either, because here, what do people write about? What Granny told me, and what legends of where I was born, and this kind of thing. Or they're writing about the birds and the bees and the beautiful scenery and all the rest of it. They're not interested in that. And I thought, well, I've got to think of something towards the future. And now, then it suddenly dawned on me, next, here in Cajamarca, we had the biggest rock scene in the country outside Lima. And I didn't know anything about rock music, but I thought, well, that's what I've got to write about. And so I managed to get in contact with a guy, Oscar Pajares, who was behind all this. And he taught me a lot, and we became great friends. So eventually, I was able to write this book, A Ojo de Pájaro. Next. Well, the young guys have been very pleased with the book. There's a guy just who lives a couple of doors down from where I live, and he told me that when that book came out, he said, I shut myself up for 2 days to read it. And that was great. A lot of the youngsters said it's the best one I'd written. But, well, for the youngsters, it was fine. But older people said, oh no, it used a lot of bad language. Now, I think this raises the whole question about what is good language, what is bad language. And well, here to start with, just a note about what I received someone gave me from the authority that controls the Spanish language. Next, the Academia, Real Academia de Lengua Española in Madrid controls the language, what is acceptable in Spanish. But one of the things they published was just a bit of information. Spanish has roughly 300,000 words. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes has 22,939 words. A couple of professionals talking today just between themselves will use roughly 3,200 words. Youngsters, contemporary youngsters, use roughly 300 words, of which 78 will be some sort of swearing. Next. So really, this raises the whole question, what is swearing? What is bad language? Now here we see Oswaldo Reynoso, the author of In Octubre No Hay Milagros. And I had gone to a writer's meeting, and he gave a very good talk about levels of language. And then in the evening, a group of us were sitting with him, we were having a drink. This was down in Trujillo. And he said, I'm accused often of using bad language. But what is bad language? And then he gave me a lesson, which I remember just rushing back to where I was staying and writing down immediately. He said, if a judge is corrupt and speaks of justice, justice in his mouth is bad language. If someone from the military who's selling arms to the terrorists or to the drug runners and speaks of patriotism in his mouth is bad language. If a priest speaks of the love of God and the love of neighbor and is abusing people and charging excessively for his services, then love in his mouth is bad language. If somebody insults a shoeshine boy, and the boy turns around and said, "Oh, fuck off, you bloody idiot," he said, "That is beautiful because it comes out of the cockles of his heart." So there we are, reflecting about language. Now, next, I have tried, well, not to use excessive four-letter words, but occasionally Mario Vargas Llosa puts it in that book, Letters to a Novelist. You must use le mot juste, the precise word. And sometimes the precise word happens to be what we would call bad language. Now, here we've got a policeman. He's not going to say to this guy, "Now, young man, come along with me, please, to report to the police station." He's going to say, "Get a bloody move on you." I mean, that's the only way you can put police speak like that. They're not terribly polite when they're arresting young hooligans. Now, me. Sometimes I get, someone says to me, "Oh, Father, I love that book you wrote. And what are you writing at the moment?" But occasionally you get some rather odd comments. And one day I was down in Lima and I'd been invited to a supper party. And we were enjoying a good meal. And the lady sitting next to me turned and said, "Miguel, you're a right bastard." I said, I managed to keep cool. And how did she come to assess my character like this? And she said, "Well, a few days ago, I picked up your latest novel and I couldn't put it down. I lost a whole night's sleep." And I said, "Well, if that's being a bastard, I'd like to carry on being a bastard." Next. Next, yeah. Now, we wanted to, we go on to this vision. Here, the contrast, I'm sometimes called a poet. I personally don't think I'm much of a poet. I write what I call graffiti verbal. Now, I don't write about the flowers and the beauty of the Sierra and all the rest of it. I tend to write about the hired gunman, the woman who has been abandoned by her husband and has children to bring up, and a lot of the other rather, shall we say, the darker side of much of our life, but which is important. I write about street sweepers and people like that, because they surely, and when I poem on the street sweeper, I said the street sweeper is more important than the mayor, because if the mayor goes away, well, nothing changes in the city. If the street sweepers go on strike, then we're in deep trouble. Well, apart from that, next, I've written this book on to do with the mining. The mining became a tremendous problem here in Cajamarca. A large gold mine was opened up, the largest in Latin America, and initially they bought up land rather on the snidely, not paying what they should have paid to the people up in the mountain heights where the mine is situated. And then there was corruption. They corrupted the local authorities so that they could do what they liked. There was the nightlife, which began to cause a lot of problems. Prices rose, the prices of apartments and houses and food. And so the whole thing became a hopeless mess, with eventually the city and the mine fighting against each other. One day, a guy says to me, "You must write about this." And so I wrote the Curse of Gold. Now, apart from that, I've written a number of essays. And when I went to Oxford, one of the first things I was told by the dean of the faculty I was studying in, is in this university, we have one object in mind, and that is to teach you to think. So writing essays is a way of thinking. Novels write themselves, but essays don't. And so I've got a couple of, one or two essays. One collection is called Scorpio. Next, one is called Snakes and Ladders. And these are reflections of Scorpio, because I am in Scorpio, that's my birth date. And Snakes and Ladders is about, well, things can be improved and there are new inventions and things, and then we use them very badly. It's like going up, and then suddenly something happens and we come down again. So I've used a number of examples of local life where improvements have been made and then things have got worse because they've been used badly, the improvement. Another next essay is called Contradiction. Now, this has been published in Spain by the Editora Académica Española. I'm fascinated by contradiction because contradiction is not necessarily all negative. I reckon in the heart of the creation of the universe, there is contradiction. Anyone interested in that can get in touch with the Editora Académica Española on internet, or I believe in Amazon. Well, another set of things which I've written next have been sort of radio plays and things like that to help people to reflect. The first one we called, I called it Villacorco, the mountain storyteller. But there was one great problem. This was all about incidents in life with questions to enable groups to discuss. But trying to record it, people here don't have the kind of education which you get in England, where kids are in theatre from primary school. But here they're not. They may be taught to recite poetry, and this tends towards ham acting. You then got the radio announcer to gabble away, blah, 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 think that's speaking well. But what happens is when you put a microphone for someone you're trying to record a text, is they freeze. And this became hopeless. And finally, well, we were getting bit by bit, we were managing to record next. But there came the problem of the mountain. And who can I get to record the mountain? We tried voice after voice. And finally, I called on this friend of mine, Andres Ceballos, who was a great painter. He died at 100 a couple of years ago. And Andres had this beautiful, fruity, deep voice. And I said, that's perfect. We put him in front of a microphone and he froze. Well, I was getting desperate because we wanted to put our series in for a competition in Lima. And then he said, I think I've got the solution. So he dashed off and he reappeared a short time later with a bottle of whiskey. We all got pissed. The thing came out perfectly and we won a gold medal in Lima. Next. Another series which I wrote with this guy, Alfredo Mieres. We're great friends. And he's behind Bibliotecas Rurales these days. And we wrote about the whole business of conquest here in Cajamarca, because it was coming up the 5th centenary of the arrival of the Spaniards here. Well, we started way back when the Incas invaded Cajamarca in roughly 1460, 1470. And then, of course, the Spaniards come in 1532. Well, Alfredo and I were writing away, and Alfredo's family has a small farm down on the coast. And so we put up a tent outside the house, and we wrote away merrily, but we sort of acted it while we were doing it. And we were, just as the Spaniards were capturing Atahualpa and throwing down his portable throne and slaughtering people, Alfredo and I were shouting at each other. Then he suddenly stopped and burst out laughing. And I looked round and I looked behind me to the entrance of the tent, and there was his family looking horrified. They thought that Alfredo and I had come to blows. Again, that series won eventually a gold medal. Next. And here we have, that was the scene that of Atahualpa being captured by the Spaniards. Next. Well, after that, I was asked to write a series, to do something for the sacraments. Now, what had happened was a group of bishops had arrived for the celebration of Corpus Christi, which is the great feast of Cajamarca, and I was called into the bishops' meeting, and they said, look, we've got money to create something for the sacraments, to teach the sacraments, but nothing has been done, and there's a danger we're going to have to give the money back. Well, now, that was an absolute disaster, of course. I mean, they imagined the bishops having to give back money. So they called in Garnett M to try and film something. And so I said, yes, I love, yeah, great opportunity. Well, now, the first thing I did next was to look at one or two other things that have been done to the sacraments. And normally what you found was some guy giving a talk and just filming some guy giving a talk. I thought, well, that's pretty boring. So I got thinking of Vamos Caminando and things we've done. No, we've got to do something else. We've got to film a whole series of actors. And since they want this for the simple people, the people in the country, then it's got to be fairly, the actors have got to be just ordinary people. Next. So I soon found myself with a camera guy, cameraman who worked in the media center where I've done quite a lot of work, Josue, and I was a German student at the time, and we went out to start filming scenes, and it was great fun. And also I discovered my own complete impertinence and lack of shame with doing things. For example, next, one fine day I'm going with a bishop out into the country, and we see the scene of a couple of the campesino ploughing the land, a couple of oxen. I said, I want that scene, stop. And so the bishop just had to wait whilst I got this thing filmed. On another occasion, I was with Josue, we were in a packed minibus, and we passed a funeral. And I said, stop, what funeral? And it was incredible. Everybody was very patient with me. Nobody shouted, nobody screamed, nobody protested. They were just as interested in seeing the funeral, I think, as I was. They were fascinated by the film. Well, that was, the series came out very well. Next. For the sacrament of matrimony, I needed a rather irate father. And we were practicing, and it was a friend of mine, and his daughter, she was howling with laughter. I said, that's Dad down to a T. You don't need any rehearsals with him, shouting and screaming. So it was all great fun, and we eventually managed to create quite a long series. Next. Well, apart from that, I've written things to help people study philosophy, to study the history of the church. They're kind of short films, because I was aware that I had the privilege of studying in Rome. I lived in England. I knew about the history of the church, the medieval church, and all the rest of it. The philosophy, the Greek philosophers, and so forth. So I tried to create a visual series, which would help my students to understand what we're talking about. Well, next, finally, I would say, what is behind all this as far as I'm concerned? Well, one day I read about a French actress who was asked, what for you is the greatest sin? And the answer was, not to be creative. God is the creator. God is the author of everything. And not to be creative is to fail in the very essence. So I try to be creative. And I would like to conclude with the words of that great North American poet, Whitman. And he writes in the poem, Walt Whitman, "O me, O life, the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse." Next. Thank you. That is basically what I wanted to say to you. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this, and I hope for you too, the powerful play goes on, and that each of you may contribute a verse. Many thanks.
Michael, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. I you went far beyond your own life into many, many fields. I found it absolutely fascinating. I particularly remarked on the words of Thomas Merton that you quoted. Those were very eloquent words that spoke to me greatly. I love the notion that of people being sanctified by leading ordinary lives. I was also very excited that you closed with a poetical reference to Walt Whitman, the man famous for the longest lines in English language poetry. Contributing a verse reminds me rather of Walter Raleigh's own verse on death, a famous poem, where he talks about the tiring house, meaning the attiring house, the dressing room, and life being a play. Of course, you quoted Shakespeare too, and Shakespeare also had something to say about life being a play. I know you're very happy to take questions from people in the audience, people who view this subsequently, and we at the Anglo-Peruvian Society will facilitate that. And I hope that it will not least generate some book sales, because mammon is still important nonetheless in all of our discussions. But I wanted to ask you, just picking up on those poetic references, and as you know, poetry is a particular interest of my own. You focus largely on your fiction and essays and so forth. Are you still writing verse?
Can you see me? Yeah.
Yes, I see you well.
Yeah. That's a block. I consider what I write graffiti verbal. I don't pretend really to be a poet. And in this city, there must be 100 poets, all writing things which I don't aspire to. I did write something at the beginning of the coronavirus, which I think you've got a copy of. But since then, I've been far more concerned with doing other things. And again, you need a sort of a flash of inspiration. Yes, I've got a number of things on, for example, the accident that happens, and there has to be compensation for the cattle that are killed, but for the people who are killed, there's nothing, and no help, no support. The unmarried mother struggling down to the market to sell something to keep the kids alive and all the rest of it. This kind of thing. I got one on what I call comida al paso. What's that? Well, that's sort of junk food.
Fast food.
Junk food.
Fast food.
I don't know whether it's fast or slow or anything, but anyway, it's certainly junk. And sort of comparing the kind of what you can buy in a stall on the street and the kind of rubbish put out on television, and this kind of thing. So I was at a poetical reading just before COVID, and I read one or two of these things which I'd written. And one young guy came up to me and he said, "I like your style. Can we talk?" And I think probably the kind of thing I write and the way I do it probably appeal more to younger guys. It's a sort of gritty style and a bit of a gritty approach to this mess which we're living in.
Yeah, I'm glad you're still expressing yourself in that way, and I should love to see a further Michael Garnett collection. That I have to say that the only line of Peruvian I've read Vallejo, of course, who is somewhat impenetrable. I'm sure you could elucidate him to me and to everybody else watching this. but the line of Peruvian poetry that sticks in my mind is from Antonio Cisneros, when he talks about viviendo en Londres y felices como chanchos, which has always stuck in my mind as a wonderful line of poetry. Do you admire Cisneros? He's dead now, of course, but did you admire?
I must admit, I've not been so involved. I've got a lot of local poetry, but unfortunately, I'm at the stage of life now. I can read something today and I've forgotten about it tomorrow. So I wouldn't be able to sort of quote anything, but I'm fully aware that there is a lot of very good poetry in this country. And as I say, I'm surrounded by poets here in Cajamarca, and it's great to listen to them and to chat with them. I didn't bring this up much in the talk, but I greatly enjoy being with writers. I go to writers' meetings. Many of them are poets, and I found that I'm accepted just as another writer in the country. I'm probably the only priest present. Well, in fact, I will be the only priest, only religious of any kind. But I'm accepted as a writer, and I find this most enjoyable, and their company, and their kindness, and their good humor, and all the rest of it. It all seems to go down very well. Something. Have we